Right. Well, hello all, and thanks for joining us. This is the first installment of what's going to be a series of webinars between Essential and AvePoint over the next few months. This session, as you've probably guessed, is focused on SharePoint archiving and how AvePoint Opus can sort of help you take control of your storage and take advantage of some serious cost savings. So, kicking things off with a bang, that is a terrible bonfire pun that I came up with last night, and I'm already regretting using. But my name's Charles, and as of this month, I've been at Essential for 10 years. During that time, I've worked with countless businesses, and I've specialized in cloud management, legacy data migration, digital workspace, and more recently, probably in the last 4 or 5 years, learning management systems, all within the Microsoft ecosystem. And I'm delighted today to be joined by Callum Note from AvePoint. He's a solution engineer there. Callum, do you want to do a quick introduction of yourself?
Yes, please. Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. Solutions engineer at AvePoint. So typically my responsibilities are things like product demos, running successful POCs or POVs now, as many people are using the new terminology, helping with implementations, technical enablement, and really just sort of being a technical go-to for all things AvePoint.
And now a webinar specialist. So perfect. Thank
you,
Callum, for joining us. If you're not already, please feel free to scan the QR code and connect with Callum and I on LinkedIn. We do share little hints, tricks, articles, little videos and so on. So please feel free to do that if you guys haven't already. What we're going to run through today, this is a topic that has become more prevalent probably for us over the last 18 months, 2 years, I would say, with regards to sort of spiraling Microsoft storage costs. This is something that a lot of customers have fallen foul to, because obviously in the cloud space, we know folder structures and just data in general grows a lot quicker than potentially people would have thought. So in this session, there's going to be some use cases from a couple of customers on how they made some cost savings. They're sort of both ends of the spectrum. One has loads of data, one on the smaller side, but we were still able to help them with that. We're also going to talk through, during the demonstration, there's going to be both the admin portal side of things, so how you set these policies, how you manage the actual admin side of things, from reporting, simulations, and so on, as well as the end user piece. Because obviously, when it comes to users and data, if things aren't where they're supposed to be, those users can cause a big fuss for your internal IT department. So we're running through a demonstration of how that looks from an admin and end user perspective once a file has been archived. And then we're actually going to talk through how you guys can access your own SharePoint storage optimization report. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk through how basically we're going to open up a 30-day period where you guys can run a simulation on your environment and see what data costs you guys could save as well. So there's a whole slide of that at the end on how you guys can gain access to that and get that data under control. Just quickly before we get into all of that, just to give you guys a bit of background for those who don't know who we are and who the company I work for is, I work for a company called Essential. We're a Bristol-based partner. We've been helping organizations fill the gaps in native Microsoft and ensuring customers sort of maximize their investments for over 30 years now. Now, some of you guys on the call may know us for other things. Maybe it's a workplace management hybrid booking solution. Maybe it's an old data migration that we've done maybe a few years ago, email migration, folder migration, and so on, or maybe more recently from a learning management project. But today we're going to focus on the cloud infrastructure suite of products that we represent, and in particular SharePoint archiving. And like I said, this has been one of the most popular and fastest growing AvePoint products that we represent, and it sort of provides granular policy driven automation, but most importantly, those tangible cost savings for you and your business. But who are AvePoint? And I think essentially Dan, who is sitting somewhere quietly in the background, is going to give us a quick synopsis of who AvePoint are.
Yep, very, very high level. Thanks ever so much. So we've been going for well over 20 years now. We are a specialist in data management for collaboration spaces such as M365. This slide is actually a little out of date now. We're now over 2,000 employees, the vast majority of which are R&D. So I think we're second to Microsoft globally in the number of R&D people we have on board. We actually now support over 19 million cloud users across a range of tools in line with data management. And under our protection, we currently manage over 350 petabytes of data. We're actually, I believe, Azure's current fourth largest consumer globally of Azure consumption. And Callum will come on to this later on the demo where we actually manage much of the data from operating in 88 countries.
Thank you, Dan. Note to self, get the updated slide for this. Some staggering numbers that you put into there. So that's Essential and that's AvePoint. So as we move through the agenda, let's talk through a couple of use cases. Now, some of the points that we talk about here, they may ring true with you guys. They may be challenges that you guys are facing or are predicting that you may face in the not too distant future. But this organization in particular, they're a long-standing Essential customer. Actually, we've done many projects with these guys. We've done email archive migrations. We did some Power BI analysis with them, and we've also done a few other bits and bobs with them, including this SharePoint archiving project. Now, they, as many organizations have come accustomed to over the last few years, had a massively growing SharePoint environment. They ended up coming into their SharePoint overage 200 terabytes over their allotted allowance, which was pretty significant. And there's a couple of metrics on the slide there, but you can imagine that the costs of that were pretty astronomical. What was unique for these guys was, although we could obviously provide them with some really decent cost savings right from the get-go, once we got through the workshop, it transpired that there was a real issue with version awareness. Now, what they basically had was maybe 9, 10, 11 versions of the same document, just slightly modified or saved in a different place. And what that meant that it was a huge percentage of their overage was actually just multiple versions of the same document. And what they were able to do with Opus was specify just to keep the last 2 or 3 versions of those documents, and immediately they were able to clear a huge chunk of storage out right from the get-go, which was really useful. Now, the granularity of the Opus tool was really, really important here because they're a manufacturing organization providing drinks worldwide. They had to maintain all versions of certain documents within certain folder structures, and what they were able to do was exclude those folder structures from the versioning that was running, and they were able to maintain that indefinitely and archive off anything that met an older criteria or any policies that they'd set. So alongside just providing maybe some date metrics of when a document was last modified and archiving it off based on that, they were able to clear a huge chunk of data just based on the versions that they had, which was really, really useful for them. Now, on the maybe lower end of the spectrum in terms of data volumes, a European sort of gym chain where their IT team were out looking for a solution because they'd had rapid SharePoint growth also. Now, the overage charges were significant for them, and much the same as the drinks manufacturer, end user experience was absolutely massive for them. So in terms of how a user would access any archived files and folders was really, really important. But the IT team on the ground had gone out and come to us and explained the situation, explained the amount they were in their overage, and were looking to actually archive that off to gain some savings. But what they found was, although the IT team were on board because it solved the problem for them, the CXO was very hesitant to go ahead because of it meaning spending more money. They were already spending a big chunk of money on overage charges, and now they needed to bring in a solution to help them. But what we were able to do was run that Opus assessment, the free Opus assessment that we're going to be talking through later at the end of the webinar, and actually showcase it in layman's terms, black and white, in a report. Well, these are the cost savings that you guys can make based on archiving this data from SharePoint Premium Storage and moving it to Azure Blob. So the ongoing savings that were shown in that report were what made the CXO realize, well, actually, this is a saving tool as opposed to a spend. So that was a really, really interesting one, and the ongoing savings are prevalent for that business, which is absolutely great. Now, I will shut up at this point and I will pass over to Callum. Let's see it in action. Callum's going to be running through, as I said, a full demonstration of Opus from an admin perspective and from an end user restore perspective as well. Callum, are you okay to start sharing and take control?
Absolutely, all good to go. So naturally, this is quite a small environment as it is a demo environment. So in a real world scenario, these numbers, you would want to see them be vastly different, especially at the end of running this sort of project. We'll come back to this dashboard at the end. But for now, yeah, I wanted to show you sort of what I tend to do on sort of day 1, day 2, and then heading into sort of week 2, week 3 on if I was implementing Opus for someone, or if I was running this as a proof of concept, how do I get my deliverables out of this? That's what I wanted to get here today. So the first thing I look to perform is a discovery and analysis. Essentially, what I'm trying to identify here is 2 types of data: inactive data and rot data, or what we refer to as redundant, obsolete, and trivial. So what we do is there's a small click-through process where essentially you tick some boxes and make some customizations which dictate what does inactive data or rot data look like to you individually. So you have the ability to say, within my SharePoint environment, I don't want to see files that are more than 3 versions old, files that haven't been modified in a certain amount of years, duplicate files, legacy pictures, videos, that kind of stuff. You don't really want to be paying SharePoint prices to store Christmas Party 2018. It's not the place for that. So it gives you the opportunity to say, right, here's what I need eliminated from SharePoint for a quick win to grab some storage back really, really quickly. And then we give it to you across these 2 reports. This one's probably my favorite one because it has this nice little tree. It breaks it down and shows me exactly, right, here's the problems. Here's what's contributing to your mass amounts of storage. So I've got 3 gig of files which are over 10 versions, 8 gig of duplicates, which is like huge, to be completely honest. In my tiny environment, that is. Real world environment, these numbers are bigger, but the percentages are probably more adjusted. So yeah, it's really good for me to come in here and understand what these problems are. I can drill this down further and understand, you know, what particular SharePoint sites do these things live in. I can use more time ranges to understand, only show me the things that are more than 3 years old and a duplicate and stuff like that. I can start to use these combinations to get an understanding of what I'm going to get rid of. And then if I'm looking for a really, really kind of almost immediate time to value with Opus, we can head into data optimization. We can choose some of the rules that I use that I configured. So you can see I've got quite a few here. So what I might do for this one is say, right, just data that which is more than 10 versions old and more than 3 years old. If that data lives within my particular SharePoint sites, wherever I've kind of grouped them together, maybe just at a default level, archive or destroy. So what I say by container is just to give you a very, very quick rundown on some AvePoint terminology, basically a group of SharePoint sites. We use containers to group together users, mailboxes, OneDrives, SharePoint sites, and we call them containers, a little bit like entry groups, to be honest. So just a very quick terminology check. Otherwise, I'll end up talking about containers loads and you'll be sat there thinking, never heard of a container in my life. So yeah, this group of SharePoint sites, if they now have data older than 3 years old with more than 10 versions, eliminate it, get it archived, get it destroyed, get it moved on. That is how I use the discovery and analysis tool on that sort of first week for that quick win. This is immediate time to value, and it's really, really good for a little bit of crisis management almost. So naturally, a lot of the demos I run with Opus start off with, we are at the limit and we need some storage pretty much immediately. Otherwise, we're throwing more money at Microsoft within the next 2 weeks. So this is a really, really good process to say, right, let's avoid that. Let's get you into proof of concept, have a look at some licensing, and then see what we can do to stop that from happening. And then once we've done that, that's when we look into the ongoing management of Opus and preventing this situation from coming to fruition again. So the inactive data report works pretty much the exact same, to be honest. You have more filters. You can see where old data lives. Then you've got the optimization to say, right, take it out from these locations. Works the same. They're pretty simple to navigate. And typically, if you're running through this for the first time, there will be someone on hand and some guidance available. Once we start these processes as well, you do also have a way to kind of monitor that. You've got some optimization progress. So we grab some like metadata and information from your SharePoint environment to say at your current growth, you can expect to see this much in SharePoint costs if kind of nothing changes, just based on how much data is being ramped up into there. And then as we run these processes, you can actually see us clawing back at that as well. So there is an element of proof in the pudding. You do have the ability to take this to the powers that be, the people that hold the purse strings within the organization, and say, hey, this is what we're doing the right thing. So all the evidence is there to make sure that, yeah, you're greenlit to do this. The next part of this is ongoing management. So now that we've done this very, very early stage identification and elimination of old rubbish data or rot data, if you want, sure we don't get back into that situation. And that comes from building out rules. The rules are actually very similar to what we use to identify rot data in the first place. It's old data, data that doesn't get modified, data that is of a certain file size and hasn't been modified, so you can actually use this to get rid of the biggest problems first. There's lots of combinations and filters you can use to find and clear out old data. So if I show you how I would build one of those together, and maybe we can look into some of the other examples that I've got as well. Cool, there we go. See, I've got a bunch in here already, but if I show you kind of the steps or what would be a process that you'd follow, we'll just call it, yeah, cal test. You can see I've done this a few times. Go for storage optimization. We're going to run this in SharePoint Online. This is also applicable to OneDrive. Everything I'm showing you now, keep in mind, absolutely applicable to OneDrive as well. It's just the focus of today is SharePoint, but just sort of keep it in back of your mind if you're ever looking into the OneDrive as well. Object level, this is quite important as well. So how can we archive and restore at the other end? So you can go all the way from a site collection down to an individual document or email. But typically when I'm running my archive jobs and I'm running this process, I'm keeping it a document email because I'm looking to identify individual files and their age, the last time they were modified. So where we've got some really useful options for the rest of these players, I 99% of the time stick it on document email because that's where I can look at content level metadata for that individual file and archive based on those things. And this is where you start to configure these identifiers. So at the moment, we've got a couple in there for a combination, but I'm just going to quickly remove one of them and show you what I typically implement from, again, a first or second week standpoint. I go from, where was it? Modified time. There we go. And you can see already there's an absolute ton on here, which we can base this on. There's a lot of different identifiers and ways that we can pick data to archive. It's not just how old is it. There's lots of stuff we've got on here to play with. But modified time is the one I would typically go in with first. And what I might say is if it's older than 3 years, archive it, put a stub in the place for the end users, and use a restore link. Again, your environment would be a lot cleaner than mine. Just I do a lot of testing. I do a lot of breaking things on purpose. So I've got lots of different things. So yeah, remove that content from SharePoint, leave a stub in place for end users to easily identify what the content used to be. And that's you can already see the basis of this rule. If it gets old, we move into cheaper storage. It's still accessible to the end users. They don't have to do too much to find it. It's in the exact same place. The stub is there for them, and I'll show you that in a minute as well. Something else you also have the ability to do is dictate how long you actually want to keep it in the archive for. So it doesn't have to be we move it into the archive forever and then you pay archiving forever. You also have the ability to control that sort of storage optimization as well if you want. So what you're able to do is you can set this an overall level. So for absolutely everything you archive of AvePoint, follow this rule, or you can build something really specific. So you can actually build a rule like this for an individual SharePoint site, not necessarily just a collection. But what you might have is one particular site with some very, very specific legal, financial, HR related content, which you need to keep for a longer amount of time than you would the default stuff. So you might build another rule based on that and apply the site that way. And what you then might come in here and say is, if that content hits the archive, we need to keep it for longer. So you might say, only when it has been archived for 10 years will we remove it from the archive. I think a really good use case is architects and engineers have to use this. They need to keep their structural designs for 20 years. Keeping it in for 20 years on SharePoint would be astronomical. So this is a good use case for that as well. But there's lots of other verticals that have similar compliance requirements for how long they must keep data for. And this is a good way to adhere to that and then also manage the cost of that as well. Cool. So I talked a little bit about the stubbing and the end user side of this. So I thought it's probably a good segue to quickly show you what that process looks like, show you what your end users can expect, how they would be interacting with AvePoint. Your end users would never see this dashboard, this tool set. That's absolutely not what we're going to do. What they would see, however, is their SharePoint sites, and they would then see these particular documents all named after healthy things. So broccoli and cauliflower.docx.url, that is obviously a formal Word document. It is now a restore link stub. So as a user, I've not had to go anywhere other than where I normally go to access my health related content, and I can restore it from here with a click of a button. I've got some permissions woes on my account at the moment, so it's telling me I can't do it, which is absolutely fantastic. But again, we break things on purpose. We fix things all the time on purpose. And I think I just got caught on the wrong end of someone doing some testing this morning. But what they normally have here is a drop down for, do you wish to restore this in place or restore it somewhere else? So they can put it straight back into that SharePoint site, or they can say, actually, I need this file to be exported so I can have it on my machine locally, or I need it in another SharePoint location. Those are typically the options. And if you want to make it easier for the users, you can customize those options and restrict them so they only have one thing to press rather than the options. Just thinking about your IT ticket queue building up because the users have got 3 things they could click. Other ways for the end users to restore things, they do actually have a web portal they can come to as well. But this does rely on the users actually knowing what they want to restore. They would have to have this information to hand. With any luck, being that it was something in their SharePoint environments which they were used to using, they would have this information. So they would be able to tell you a little bit about it. They also have access to something within Teams as well. Oh, there we go. Thanks, Ross, coming in to save the day with a proper screenshot of what I was unable to due to my permissions. Thank you so much. End users also have the ability to do this from within Teams. So they don't actually have to go into their web browser. And I did load mine up earlier. So we have a little bot that we can put onto their Teams. So on the left-hand sidebar, where you've got your chats, your Teams, your calendar, that kind of stuff. We can have one underneath that called Ava. And you would open up that, and then it's, simple from there. So there we go, restore file in SharePoint. And there we go, it's asking me for a bit of information about it, and that's it. So they don't need to have anything bookmarked. They don't need to be on VPN. They don't need to do anything which they wouldn't be normally doing. They can also get some guidance from the tool as well in regards to how to actually start. They can view the prompts if they don't type that in. With these kind of things, these bots and stuff like that, sometimes it is only as good as the prompts you give it. So having the prompts there for them to click on is gold, to be honest. Otherwise, they're going to get it wrong. Cool. And let me quickly open up that screenshot from Ross there. Yeah, there we go. So restore to original, restore to another location, or export. And that is a customizable option. Thank you very much for the screenshot. Cool. So that's a couple of things that I would run from a very, very early point in a particular or a POC or an implementation. However, before we run these processes and we get all gung-ho about, let's just go and take everything out of SharePoint, what I would prefer to do is actually take customers through a little bit of an impact assessment. So it's really, really great to, say on paper, we're going to go and grab this much storage back immediately. It's brilliant. But what is quite important is understanding what are we eliminating, what is going to be removed, and is it going to be important to my end users at some point? And that is where simulations come into play. So I can build out something like this, really, really specific rule, or I can make it really, really brutal. Last modified time 2 days ago, something like that. And then run that against a SharePoint site to understand what would be removed before we actually go and do it. And it's something pretty easily done as well. So it's actually quite important to show you this area. There's a couple more things I want to take you through. So we head into storage optimization. These are my containers again. So coming back into the fold, my groups of SharePoint sites. And if I just open up one of these, my default SharePoint site container, you can kind of see how it's now put together. So if I wanted to run a simulation against my community SharePoint page, I would come into here, I would select the rule which I'm looking to use, or I've got a few applied to this already. Maybe I need to select one that hasn't got rules applied to it. Let's have a quick look at this one. Yeah, do you know what? I'm going to bin a few things off, add a rule. I'm going to get told off for that, but that's fine. Yeah, that's fine. Cool, and there it is. Now I can simulate that job, this particular archive job. So in terms of how long it takes, it comes down to the number of items. So even if you've got, you can have 100 items in there, which are a couple of terabytes each, or you can have 100 items in there, which is a couple of kilobytes each. Simulation, it is all based on number of items. So if you're thinking about how long is this going to take, how long is it going to be until I get results, it's based on that. So don't worry about running this on, things with massive files. It's going to take the same amount of time as if those files were absolutely tiny. Typically looking around the 1 to 2 hour mark for a couple of terabytes. That's what I had yesterday anyway on one of these. And that report gives us some really, really useful information. And again, these are screenshots that were handed to me earlier because I don't have a simulation available. We haven't run one for a little while. But to show you these very, very quickly, this is the kind of information that you get out the other side of this. So it would tell you successful objects. This is the amount of itams that would be archived, how much data size would be reclaimed by that. So this was quite a small simulation, but I imagine it's because if you're simulating against a SharePoint site with active archiving in place, it's not going to find a great deal. And what we can also do is hop into the details and see exactly what those files are, what is going to be removed and what did build up that storage. So this is your impact assessment. This is making sure that what is being removed is relevant, it is fine to go, it's not going to be needed within the next 10 minutes. You can get this data exported into a CSV as well. So if you needed to do more things with that data, if you needed to manipulate it in some way and present it to someone that wasn't on a dashboard, yep, that report is absolutely exportable. Use filters, use pivot tables. I'm sure some of you are much better at Excel than I am. And yeah, you can do something really, really nice with it. So that data is available to download from this platform as well. In terms of how often these rules run, so you've gone and built out an archiving policy to say, right, when data hits the two-year-old mark, it gets moved into the archive. How often are we checking for that that aging process? And that comes down to storage optimization job schedule. So you can customize when you want this process to run. It again, it isn't a prescription thing that AvePoint are giving you. This is how often do you feel like you need to run it for your SharePoint environment. And that can come down to a number of hours. So nice and open for whatever you need. If you're looking for a couple of best practices, some ways to make it faster, what you might run is an archiving policy which identifies files which are maybe over 100 meg and 1 year old or something like that. That would run pretty quickly. But it would also get you back storage really, really fast. You're taking out the biggest files which haven't been touched for a little while, and that's going to get you the storage back pretty quick. The longer jobs are the ones where you're looking at, right, don't worry about default file size, don't worry about any intricate filters, just find everything that's old. That's going to take you a little while. So if you're thinking about how can I speed that process up in the long run, building out those little filters, those little in-betweens, and having those run maybe once a week and the big jobs running once a month, that's going to make sure this thing runs smooth, runs fast. You're not going to be sat around for weeks waiting for just one archive job to run. And yeah, we can help you with designing all of those things as well. Yeah, we can build out some nice stuff for you. Cool. Is typically how I would implement Opus, what I would do before kind of handing the keys over and allowing people to have a play around. You've probably gathered, but there is an absolute ton that Opus can do outside of storage optimization. You'd be glad to know that you can pick the modules that are required. So you don't have to pay for this massive platform, which does 100 different things that you don't actually need if you're just looking to save money in SharePoint. You don't necessarily need to take the lot of it. But if you're looking at, hey, what else can it do? Just as a very, very quick nod to some of those things. It's also a records management tool. So Opus is basically two tools that we used to have blended. It was record management and archiving. Information lifecycle management as well. So if you need approvals processes in place, if you need people to be managing data as it ages, if it's being kept live, you can build those processes into it. Lots of data classification as well, which does sort of tie into the archiving. If you need to identify sensitive data, mark it as immutable so that it can't be archived, that's part of Opus functionality as well. Cool. So just seeing we've got a couple of questions pop into the chat. Where could you select document email? Does this mean it is email archiving as well as SharePoint archiving? The email side comes into the lifecycle management. So that's on a slightly different module. If you're just looking at the storage optimization module, which is the SharePoint and OneDrive archiving, that's where that lives. The email, so the /email part of that identifier, yeah, that's going to be for the lifecycle management and not massively used for email archiving. I'll be completely honest, that's not Opus core functionality. Where it allows you to declare or tag content, is this a tag that native M365 can work with? You define M365. Yes, you can combine those. You can shore those up. You can use 365 tags to declare from within Opus. You can also tag it with a unique thing from Opus as well. But yeah, I guess that comes down to, as you're using Opus, making sure that you're using the 365 tag names and stuff like that, but that can marry up. That's absolutely fine. You can select based on tags as well. You can identify data based on tags. And archiving, deleting older versions mean that you can avoid older versions being indexed by Copilot. Yes, absolutely. So we haven't really spoken about Copilot today, but AvePoint, we do have like a Copilot readiness thing going at the moment. And to be honest, everything I've shown you today is actually a part of it. Making sure that you don't have old, outdated, irrelevant content available to Copilot to manipulate and produce content based from. Absolutely a part of it. And that is what Opus is taking care of. It's removing those old things. Copilot can't read data from our archive. It can only read data from 365 natively or anything that you specifically build into it. But that's a different conversation about Copilot entirely.
Another question just come through there, Callum. What is the biggest M365 tenant you experience to optimize storage for?
Personally, I'm not sure. Dan, you've seen some massive ones, haven't you?
Yeah, there's a large media organization that we reduced from around about 7.5 petabytes down to just over 3, making hundreds of millions of dollars saving there. But as I think Charles said at the outset with the 2 examples there, the solution just scales. So whether or not you've got an environment with a couple of petabytes, or whether or not you've got an environment with just 1 or 2 terabytes, you're still going to make cost savings, and those cost savings are going to obviously be relative to the size of your environment. One thing I meant to mention earlier, particularly when Charles was talking through the drinks manufacturer. So AvePoint don't sell directly to end user organizations. We work through trusted partners and a network of them. What I would say about Charles and the team is that they have an excellent understanding of the Opus tool and its predecessor, the cloud archiving tool. So you're certainly in good hands. I think within the UK, they're probably one of our most knowledgeable partners in this area.
Kind words, Dan. Thank you. Just conscious, there's a couple of questions here. I think Luke had his hand up first. So Luke, if we go to you, and then we'll come to you, Dan, afterwards.
Thanks, Charles. Thanks, Callum. Appreciate that this morning. We're currently users of both Essential Resource Planner and AvePoint. Opus, is there any synergy between Opus and other AvePoint solutions? So with, say, for example, the M365 capability, is there any way to switch between the two portals and move information freely? I've seen quite a lot of the features are in both of the tools, like the end user restore capability and so on.
So at the moment, everything AvePoint wise is in different dashboards,
Sure.
which it's not fluid. However, we are releasing a kind of like, I want to say a new interface, but it's probably not going to be as exciting as that. We are releasing a single pane of glass where you will pretty much have tabs for each individual AvePoint service, as opposed to going back to AvePoint Online Services, picking a new tool from here and jumping across. So there will be better synergy January, February release.
That's great, thank you. And we touched on that earlier, the SharePoint archiving. Would Opus essentially replace that capability? So if you're already a SharePoint using SharePoint archive functionality and paying for that, if you were to switch over to Opus, you could essentially stop the Microsoft archiving element.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, absolutely. Cool. It would be a like for like replacement. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that.
With a lot more functionality, Callum.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Thanks, Charles.
Just to check that in there, Dan. I don't know if you're going to add anything there, but
really just on the massive differences in functionality, particularly on the granular level.
Yeah, being able to drill down and end users and so on. Perfect. Right, I think we've got another one. Sorry, David, have you got a question?
Yes. Hi. So where is the content actually archived to? Is this to the AvePoint cloud, or would this be to my organization's cloud?
That's a great question. You can actually kind of choose where you want it to be archived. So by default, it's our storage. So it would be where we're hosted, UK South, Azure. That said, if you did want to bring your own storage, if you had your own S3, if you had your own data centers or something like that, yeah, absolutely. It is up to you where you get this stored. Our default storage is fairly cost effective anyway. So we don't typically see a lot of people shy away from it. However, some people want the redundancy of the data in Microsoft, the backups in Amazon. So they would choose S3 for that purpose and things like that. But yeah, typically most people go AvePoint's default.
As Essential deal with customers globally, it's probably worth pointing out AvePoint storage, we've actually got 14 global instances. So whereas a lot of UK based organizations will choose our UK instance, we do have other locations globally in both Azure and AWS. And that has no impact on the price, whether or not you choose AWS in the UK or you choose Azure in North America.
Okay. I mean, just where I'm coming from here is it's important to us that our data doesn't leave our tenant boundary. So, we would want it to be Microsoft, but we would also want to know that, for instance, the, shall I say, the wrapper solution that I can see you run in here, that none of our data leaves our boundary. Would that be technically possible, or would there still be, index data, inventory data that's leaving and managed by AvePoint?
I would say that's possible. So if you're using your own Azure storage within your with your tenancy, that's fine. As it passes through AvePoint, there'll possibly be some metadata stored. That said, that wouldn't be held onto forever. So we're using API to transfer from point A to point B. So it's not going to be stored with us if it's not designated to do so. But I would say your use case is absolutely achievable.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, David. Are there any? I can't see any other questions in the chat window. If you do have another question, please feel free to jump in while I switch over and start sharing my screen. I realized I had this handy Q&A slide open, which we didn't use, but nevertheless, I think we'll move on from the Q&A section and discuss how you guys can access this yourselves and the steps that we'll follow. So again, we're using QR codes. We're trying to stay up with the time. So if you wanted to scan that QR code, that will take you to a page to basically sign up for that free 30-day simulation that we talked about, where you can actually run through all of those steps that Callum showed. So apply some policies there, run some simulations, and actually have a true understanding of what cost savings you guys could have as a business. What we'll do is Essential will be involved in a quick 30-minute or so call where we'll showcase AvePoint Opus again one-on-one with you guys, give you the chance to ask any questions that may pop into your head between now and then. And then we'll talk through setting up a couple of policies for you. So maybe some generic ones, maybe some more granular runs. We'll run those simulations and run the system for 30 days. And following those 30 days, maybe sooner, depending on how available both teams are, we'll actually have some reports and some tangible data for you guys to see and review and see if this is something that could really save you guys some money and the business money. So at the end of the 30 days, we'll have another quick review call to talk through those findings, and off the back of that, hopefully have some next steps with you guys to get going on it full time. So please feel free to scan that QR code, although I think there will be a link sent round to you guys afterwards anyway. So if you do miss it, then please feel free to use that link that comes your way by email. As I said earlier on, this is the first installment of what is going to become a series of webinars that we've run in between Essential and AvePoint. The next session, we're churning them out thick and fast. The next session is the 26th of November, same time again, 11 AM. This is not necessarily specific to Opus, but there are some crossover areas that Callum sort of touched on with regards to Copilot readiness, and Opus being the driver for the data cleansing. But the next webinar is going to be around insights and policies and being able to identify some potential security risks. One of the use cases I had recently was a customer. They had a big data breach previously. What they really needed to do, as their M365 environment was growing and growing and growing, they needed to have a report on what was externally facing in terms of shared folders, shared files, and so on, because they had no clue whatsoever. This tool is the tool that will come in, scan the environment, run and find things like security risks on external facing documents, folders, and so on, as well as some internal stuff, teams that don't have any owners, and so on. And basically, we want to resolve those gaps and risks ahead of potentially a Copilot or an AI sort of process and journey that you guys will be going on, but also just to rectify any issues that you've got. So that solution is fantastic for identifying those risks, and it actually generates some suggested policies that you guys can implement as well. So that's really a really useful tool, and it will have some safeguarding measures for you in there as well. That session will follow the same structure. So we'll talk through some customer stories on how other organizations have had found peace of mind ahead of an AI journey that they're about to go on. We'll run through a live demonstration, run those policies, do the search, do the analysis, and then run some policies against your environment or demo environment. And then basically we'll do the same 30-day thing again, where you guys can run an assessment of your own M365 environment to identify any risks or gaps or areas that need attention and put those policies in place. So that'll be a really useful session. please feel free again to scan the QR code to sign up to that session, and that is where we'll leave you. Again, we're really pushing content out on LinkedIn, so if you haven't connected with us already, I think this QR code takes you to the Essential page. Please feel free to scan that, and I look forward to seeing you guys on the next session, hopefully. Thanks again, Callum. Thanks again, Dan, for your time. Really, really useful session, and thanks to everybody that asked questions in the chat or verbally as well. We really, really appreciate the engagement.
Take care, everyone.
Goodbye.
Thank you, guys.
And we'll catch you on the next one.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Bye, guys.